Hello everyone! In this tutorial, I will show you how to make a nature-inspired weaving. And to check out more tutorials, online courses, and patterns, make sure to head to the website at cactusladycreation.com. The materials that we will use for this project are a branch, twigs, pine cones, yarn in various textures and colors, beads or crystals, scissors, and dried flowers. For this project, I'm going to show you two different methods that you can use to warp your branch. You want to make sure that you pick a nice sturdy branch for this project with a V shape in it so it's easy to warp. In weaving, the warp threads in your piece are the vertical lines, and each traditional weaving project begins with creating them. For this first method, we will begin by tying 2 regular overhand knots, connecting your string to the branch beginning at the bottom of the V. Then you will wrap the string around the branch from back to front 1 complete time. Once you've done this, you'll now bring the string around the branch again from front to back on the opposite side, wrapping the string around the branch 1 complete time. You want to make sure that as you wrap the string around the branch that it's held in place and nice and secure. You can test this by placing your finger or thumb on the string and making sure that it doesn't slip or slide around. It's also great to look for any lumps that might be on the branch to assist in holding the string in place so it doesn't slip when you weave. Continue again wrapping the string on the opposite side from back to front 1 complete time. If you have any issues with your string holding in place, you want to feel free to rewrap the string again, making sure that it's nice and secure before moving on. It may take a few times, which is okay. There's never a need to rush this part of the weaving process. Now we'll continue on the other side, wrapping the branch from front to back 1 complete time. Continue wrapping the whole branch this way, and as you do, you'll notice that the warp strings are alternating on each side, front and back. This is the effect that this wrapping method creates. When we get to the end of the branch, or wherever we want to stop weaving for this project, we're going to secure the string to the branch by tying 2 regular overhand knots. This second wrapping technique I'm going to show you is a little harder to keep secure when you're first weaving, but it is my personal favorite when weaving with a more narrow branch shape such as this one. It's super easy as well. You just begin by tying 2 overhand knots to secure the string to the branch. Then simply wrap the warp string 1 complete time around the whole branch like so. Make sure that the strands are very secure as you wrap as well so they don't slip around when you weave. When you get to the end of your branch or wherever you want to stop weaving, make sure to just secure the string to your branch by tying 2 overhand knots. Make sure to test the tension of your warp strings before you begin weaving. The warp thread should be tight and secure, then you're ready to go. The first weaving technique I will show you is called twining, and it's the perfect way to begin our branch weaving because it will help give the weaving some structure. There are several different ways to create this technique, but today I'll just show you one simple way. We're going to start out by finding the first 2 warp threads and place 1/2 of the yarn behind and through the first 2 warp threads from back to front. The middle section of the yarn should now be behind the first 2 warp threads. We now have 2 strands to work with. Then we will find the next 2 warp threads, take the other half of the yarn and place it in front of the first 2 warp threads and behind the next 2 warp threads, like so. Now we will take that first yarn strand and place it in front of the next 2 warp threads and behind the next 2 warp threads. Now take that second yarn strand and place it in front of the next 2 warp threads and behind the next 2 warp threads. We will continue on in the same fashion for the whole row. The basic rule of this technique is that the yarn is twisting and weaving the regular over and under pattern through the warp threads. When I get to the more narrow part of the branch, I use a crochet needle to help pull the yarn through the branch. And when you get to the end of your row, you can wrap the first yarn strand completely around the last 2 warp threads. And now you're ready to weave the other way. When you get to the end of your row, you can just leave a tail of yarn at the end, and I'll show you what to do with them later. For this next weaving technique, I'm using a thinner wool yarn and I'm threading an embroidery needle so that it is easier to pass through each warp thread. This next technique is called Tabby weaving, in which you weave the pattern under, over, and so on for each warp thread. For this piece, I will do a few rows of tabby weaving. After you weave through a few of the warp strands, you want to leave a bubble shape, and then using your hands, a fork, or a comb, beat down the yarn through the warp strands. This bubbling technique will make sure that the edges of your piece stay straight. When you get to the end of this row, you want to turn back and make sure that you alternate the pattern from the previous row to under, over, over. It may take some practice and mindfulness to make sure to not skip any warp threads and that the pattern stays consistent. If at any point during the weaving process your warp threads start to loosen, you can always untie and then retie and tighten that warp thread to make sure that it stays secure. After creating a few more rows with different yarns using the tabby and twining weaving techniques, I also added some beads to my twinings row. Using a crochet needle, I pulled the yarn through the bead to add it to the piece. Then I take that yarn strand that I placed through the bead and continue with the Twinings weaving technique, which will also secure the bead in place. I decided to add 3 beads total using this method and then continued with the rest of the row. Then I added a couple more rows using the twining technique, using another yarn to add interest and varying textures. I also added 3 more beads on the other side of the piece in order to add interest. Now I will show you how I added dried flowers to this piece. Holding the flower by its woody stem, I used the Tabby technique to pass the stem through the warp threads over and under each one. I then layered each flower stem on top of the other, alternating the pattern to make sure that it's nice and secure. I also added some twigs to give it some extra interest. Now I will show you how I clean up the yarn at the end of each row. I tie one single overhand knot, and then using my crochet needle, or you can also use an embroidery needle, whichever is easiest, on the back of the piece I find that next stitch, and then I take both ends of the strand and I place it through that stitch. Since the stitches are so far apart on this row, I will tuck it one more time under this stitch, and then I will move on to the next stitch, tucking it in the back of the piece. I then tuck it again one more time on the next stitch. And since now that strand is secure, I cut the ends. Then you just want to tuck in that tail to make sure that it's not sticking out and that it's nice and secure. Now I continue with all of the ends at the edge of the piece this way, tucking them into the back stitches of the piece and weaving them through, making sure that they're nice and secure. I also decided I wanted to go a little bit further and add some twigs to the bottom of the piece to add more interest. To do this, I used a cotton string, folded it in half, placed the loop over the top and behind the twig, and placed the 2 ends through that loop, making a lark's head knot to secure the string to the twig. Then I placed the string through the bottom of the branch where I wanted to place that twig. In order to secure the twig to the branch, I then, using each strand, tied another knot around the branch and the twig to secure it. I then decided I wanted to add 2 more twigs to the bottom of the piece, and so using a half hitch knot, I then used the left strand and tied it on the left and put my finger in the space and then tied that string around the right side and placed it through that loop to secure it. I then did the same thing with the right strand, tying it around the twig from the left side and then from the right side placing it through the space. I then did that one final time with the third twig and then decided I wanted to add a pine cone to the end, and so using a string I tied a couple of knots around the stem of the pine cone and used some hot glue to reinforce the string so that it doesn't fall out, and then I tied a simple overhand knot twice around the bottom twig in order to secure the pine cone to the piece. And now we've made a nature weaving. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to this channel and click the bell button to be notified for future tutorials. Thank you for watching.